So, Nancy, could you take us from then to the here and now? The headline today is Eric Adams' administration is paying $90 an hour to security guards in the shelters for the migrants. $90 an hour.
Yeah, so apparently Brad Lander did eventually get around to reviewing some of these contracts to determine.
And Brad Lander is who?
Well, he's the comptroller. So what happened is, this is his job to actually, prior to these contracts, review them. But in November 2022, he granted the emergency powers to Adams, by virtue of this migrant crisis. So he kind of abdicated his authority to review these contracts. And now, because there's so much blowback, he's starting to, have to look into them. So what he did was he released a report reviewing now just 4 of these contracts, mind you. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. But it has to do with the staffing specifically related to security at 4 of the migrant shelter facilities. I think it's the HERCs, right? So these humanitarian centers. And they're vastly different in what they charge for the same exact services. The contracts are all over the place. And getting from $50 to $90 for security.
I know what you said. $50 to $90 an hour for a minimum wage security guard.
Now, and again, what they call them security staff. So that's not even to say that they have the qualifications of an actual security guard or training.
Let me make mention, if any of you are in need of employment, it's not a minimum wage job. You better run to these migrant shelter centers and say you want to be a private security guard. You too can make $50 an hour or the high level $90. No special skills. You don't have to be a high school graduate. You don't even have to have a GED. You just don't have to have a serious criminal record. Misdemeanors, yes. Felonies, no.
Yeah, so basically this is reviewing what these no-bid contracts, which are paying private companies, how that would look in comparison, if we had actually had city employees utilized for these same services, and using examples of Department of Health, peace officers, and what they normally get, and more or less showing that it would be a $50 million per year savings had they, instead of going to these private companies to give these little contract kickbacks, just use the workforce we had. I mean, you could have given people who already work for the city opportunities to get overtime, opportunities to expand their services. We could have hired internally. We could have built up an internal workforce that was fine instead of giving away these contracts, which clearly are being called out now as crooked. So again, this is just 3 of 4.
I want to, again, specify that this is the bottom rung of the contract, security, because you get basically minimum wage earning men and women with no skill levels. Arrow Security is one of these. We've talked about this before, Nancy. Providing security at Randall's Island, which is in chaos. Another 2 guys got arrested there for knocking out a security officer from Arrow. Arrow is the go-to security private company at Creedmoor, where they have just decided to put an extra 150 single able-bodied men of military age with nothing to do, nowhere to go, and shove them in a tent. That now means they have a total of 1,500 there on Hillside Avenue. And Arrow has most of the contracts. There are others who are contracted, but at this crazy amount of money, with no bid contracts, it doesn't take anybody much to know that there has to be kickbacks galore to the friends of Eric Adams. And let me just say this, in addition, while this is all going on, Frank Carone, who was the fundraiser for Eric Adams' campaign the first time he got elected, now runs the biggest lobbyist group in the city. He's raising money for Eric Adams' legal defense fund because he could be indicted any day by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. And he's raising money for his reelection in 2025. Imagine you're going to deal with the city. You got to go through Frank Carone, all these contracts, and he's telling you straight up, you better get on the ship before it pulls out of the port. Show me the money. That's what it's all about. Can I hear that again? Can I hear a chorus, Eric Adams, please?
Show me the money. Show me the money. That's what it's all about.
City Hall for sale. Happened with Ed Koch. There was 2 great journalists, Wayne Barrett who sort of led the effort, and Jack Newfield. They exposed the corruption in the last term of Ed Koch. This is even more egregious. Continue, because Brad Lander, who would like to be mayor over my dead body, the city controller, is moving in for the kill on Eric Adams' friends who are getting these kickbacks.
Well, and just to exemplify how much of a show this is, so when .go first got all of that bad press brought down upon it because of its overcharging and its lack of transparency, so then Brad Lander tried to flex a little bit in September by not approving a $432 million contract, which involved .go, but like most things, you sort of ignore it for a little bit. They think people will forget. And at the start of this year, they approved another contract for $565 million to provide services for the entire year for the HERC centers, including .go. So again, they have this show where they'll call out one contract, but then they just supply them in another contract. So the city continues to do business with them in spite of this scathing report, in spite of knowing that they're being overcharged. It doesn't end anything.
This is all city money. This is all, everyone who pays taxes in the city, we're getting bilked, we're getting extorted, we're getting shook down. Again, let's deal with its most simple aspect. We're going to unfold this like an artichoke. We're going to peel away the layers each and every show that you're with us, Nancy, doing the deep dive. But let's just deal with the main layer. Security officers hired, companies that have been outsourced to get the contracts. They're being paid $50 to $90 an hour, where you could have had a minimum wage local security officer standing there wearing an Arrow shirt or whatever other shirt of other security companies. There's massive kickbacks in this. It is so obvious. And ever since Nancy started going after the .go contract, because it was under the guise of an executive emergency order, no bid contract, and then you try to find out the details. Notice they redacted everything. Redacted everything.
Yeah, and think about the problem with it being security. There's clearly a lack of transparency. There's a lot of criminality going on internally. There's a lot of things spilling out onto the street that are now becoming the problem for the NYPD, which we already have a strain on. So we're paying top dollar for internal security that clearly can't take care of security internally. And now it's becoming our problem and actually impressing further upon our little money that we have for public safety.
What you have to know, ladies and gentlemen, is uniformed members of the NYPD, undercover police officers, are not permitted to come into any of the migrant shelters, any of the migrant centers, unless there's a 911 call. They are to remain on the outside. They are to patrol on the outside. They are leaving it to these private security groups, and in some instances, the National Guard, New York State National Guard, that has been sent in by Kathy Crime Wave Holcomb. And there is complete chaos in the migrant centers as a result of this dysfunction. But the money keeps flowing.
Yeah, they just had an incident at a shelter on 125th Street when the cops were allowed in to actually arrest the person. There was actually someone assaulted right in front of them, the security guard. So this is how emboldened they are to just commit crimes.
Imagine, uniformed members of the NYPD come in, make the arrest after the 911 call, and another, quote, asylum seeker, thug, illegal alien, then punches out another migrant right in front of the cops because he knows there are no consequences. This is Alvin Bragg land. You can almost kill somebody and get away with it. Or maybe you'll do 3 days, remanded to jail, no bail. Total chaos. And remember, the very person who is the CEO of this DOCO, can I hear the DOCO one more time, please? The young man who exposed this for Project Veritas.
What's your relationship with DOCO?
The CEO at that point who made the deal with Eric Adams, his name was Anthony Al Capone. I kid you not. That was his real name. Look it up. Google it. Anthony Al Capone, the CEO. A month later, the Albany Times Union gets a tip. They do a complete background check of this guy. He's like George Santos, too. There is absolutely nothing true about this guy's resume from birth to exile. And instead of the Adams administration saying, well, we want to review the contracts or relationship, Eric Adams took a microphone and said, no, DOCO are our partners. where one CEO came from, they'll find another CEO, and they continue to do business. Because in the land of Eric Adams, his battle cry always is,
show me the money. Show me the money. That's what it's all about.